When Shaquille O'Neal came back to Newark, he just wanted to walk the old streets. He wanted to breathe in the smell of the place where he grew up. What he never expected was that his feet would carry him to a small bakery with a closing sign on the door. And the woman standing behind the counter, she was the same neighbor from 40 years ago. The one who used to slip bread into his mother Lucille's bag during the months when the family had nothing to eat. She never told anyone. Shaq never knew. That discovery stopped the 7'1" man cold, right there in the middle of that little bakery, like his feet had been nailed to the floor. What started as a simple afternoon walk was about to pull Shaq into something he was not ready for. A 40-year-old debt he never knew he owed. A secret that one woman had carried in silence. And a decision he could not walk away from. Along the way, he would hit walls that seemed impossible to break through. And only one thing would get him past them. Something his mother had taught him during the hardest years of their life in Newark. Could a debt that old still be paid? Shaquille O'Neal pulled his gray hoodie up over his head. He stood at the corner of South Orange Avenue and Springfield Avenue, both hands stuffed into the pockets of his worn jeans, staring down the street like a man trying to remember something from a long time ago. No assistant, no security, no schedule, just him in Newark. He had come back to this city many times since he left at 13, to invest, to speak, to cut ribbons at openings. But this trip was different. He had not told anyone he was coming. He booked his flight at 11 o'clock the night before. Alone. He sat in the last row because there was no seat anywhere else on the plane with enough legroom for his 4-foot legs. The flight attendant recognized him the moment he ducked through the door. She started to say something. He gave a small shake of his head. She understood and left him alone the whole flight. He needed Newark the way a person needs to go home when something inside them is not right. Nothing he could name clearly. Nothing he could explain. Just a feeling that there was something he had never finished dealing with, and it was sitting here, waiting for him. 3 weeks earlier, he had been alone in his office in Orlando. His assistant had been going through old storage and found a box, a brown cardboard moving box, sealed with packing tape that had gone yellow. Inside were things from his old Newark apartment, things his mother had carried with her through more than a dozen moves. Through Texas, through Louisiana, through Orlando. His mother had written one word on top of the box in her own handwriting, Newark. He sat down and opened it. There were photos, old letters, a few paper certificates from elementary school, the thin kind that teachers printed and filled in by hand, gone yellow at the edges. A red plastic bracelet he had bought at a summer fair in 2nd grade, with coins he had found on the street. He picked up each item, looked at it, set it down. Then he pulled out a black and white photograph of his mother standing in front of their old Newark apartment. Lucille O'Neal, wearing a thin coat, a grocery bag in her hand. Her mouth was smiling, but her eyes were not. Her eyes looked straight into the camera, with the look of a woman doing calculations that only she could see. He stared at that photo for 20 minutes, did nothing else, just looked. Then he put it down and called his assistant. Book me a flight to Newark. Earliest one you can find. Now he was here, on the street he had run down 1,000 times. As a kid, tall, clumsy, shoes worn down at the heel. The smell of wet pavement. The sound of a car horn somewhere far away. An old dog lying on the front steps of a brown house, lifting its head to look at him, with eyes that held no opinion, then setting its head back down. Nobody recognized him. Or if they did not care. He liked that. He started walking. No destination, just letting his feet go where they wanted. Past the narrow alley behind the Baptist church his mother used to go to every Sunday morning. Past the concrete playground, where he used to shoot on a rim with no net. He could still feel what it was like, the ball going through nothing, no swish, just the hard smack when it hit the ground below. Past the corner store that used to be Kowalski's, now a nail salon, with a pink sign, where he used to stand outside the glass and look at the candy he could not afford to buy. Newark does not change the way people talk about change. It does not get better or worse in a straight line. It just keeps going, like a person who has decided that keeping going is enough. The old walls get painted new colors, but crack along the same lines. New faces carry the same eyes, the eyes of people who know next month is not going to be easier than this one. Shaq knew those eyes. He had worn them through his early years. He turned on 100th Street, the street he had lived on from age 6 to 13, before his stepfather got new orders and moved the whole family. Apartment 14 was still there. The second-floor window, the one he used to sit at in the evenings, looking down at the street, his long legs hanging out over the sill because there was nowhere else to put them, was still there. Thin yellow curtains moving in the draft. Not his family's old curtains, but the same window, the same frame he had pressed his hands against 1,000 times. He stopped, stood there for 30 seconds, did nothing, just looked up. Then he turned and kept walking. That is when he saw it. At the end of Hunterdon, where the street bends toward Avon Avenue, a small bakery. The glass door was clouded with steam from inside. The smell of butter and flour came through the gap at the bottom even, though it was almost dark out. Pale yellow light from inside fell across the sidewalk, making a small warm square on the gray concrete. And taped to the glass was a large red sign printed in thick black letters. Liquidation sale, closing in 30 days. Shaq stopped in front of the door. He was not going in. This was none of his business. Shops close in Newark all the time. That is just the reality of a city that has always had to fight. He knew that better than most people. He looked through the glass. Inside, a woman was packing up. She stood with her back to him, stacking brown cardboard boxes onto a handcart. Gray and white hair pinned up at the back of her neck. A green apron, with white flour on the shoulder and down one arm. Her movements were slow, not from laziness, but from tiredness. The kind of tired that comes from standing on the same 2 feet for too many years and from packing away in boxes the things you spent your whole life building up. Shaq turned to leave, but his feet did not move. He stood there 10 more seconds, then 20. He could not explain why. There was no clear reason to stay. Nothing special about this little bakery, just the smell of butter and a red paper sign. But something in that smell, something familiar. Not the kind of familiar that comes from eating there before. Something deeper, older, the kind of familiar a person cannot explain with their brain. He pushed the door open. A small bell rang above his head. The butter smell hit him like a wave, warm, thick, faintly sweet. The shop was small enough for 3 wooden tables and a long glass display case. The case was nearly empty, a few croissants leaning sideways, and 1 white loaf sitting alone on a tray. The white tile floor had a crack in the right corner that ran crooked like a line drawn by hand. The ceiling fan rattled on every turn, the sound of something that had needed fixing for a long time and never got fixed. The woman looked up. She looked at him. At first it was the look of any shopkeeper. "Who is this? Can I help you? We are almost closed." Then her expression changed. Not the way a person looks when they recognize a celebrity. No excitement, no open mouth, no shaking hand reaching for a phone. Something slower, deeper. Like she was trying to match a grown man's face to a very old memory of a child. Then she smiled. Not a customer service smile. The smile of someone who has just seen something they did not think they would ever see again. "You want the same bread you used to eat when you were little?" Shaq went still. 30 years of adult life, millions of dollars, hundreds of games, for NBA championship rings, a doctoral degree, a name known all over the world. None of it had prepared him for that question. Because only one person on earth knew what bread he used to eat when he was little. He looked more carefully at the woman's face. She was 58 years old, but he was trying to look through 40 years, through the lines at the corners of her eyes, through the gray and white hair, through the way she stood, left shoulder slightly lower, weight shifted to her right foot, the posture of someone who had spent too many years behind a counter and whose body had quietly adjusted to hold up under it. To a face he had once known, the face of the neighbor from apartment 12, 2 doors down. "Ma'am." His voice came out rougher than usual, not from feeling, but because the words got stuck somewhere in his throat before they could come out. "Are you Miss Agnes?" She did not answer right away. She turned toward the kitchen. He heard light footsteps, a metal tray sliding against a shelf, then came back out with a small round roll in her hand. Brown gold crust, split open at the top the way bread splits when it rises just right. Still warm. He could feel the heat from a step away. She set it on the counter in front of him. Sit down, she said. It just came out of the oven. Shaq looked at the plastic chair in front of him. The pale green kind. Newark had them everywhere. Corner stores, bus stops, waiting rooms at the public clinic, anywhere people sat and waited for things they were not sure would come. He looked down. The seat came up to his knees. He lowered himself carefully, one step at a time. The chair creaked under 325 pounds. His knees came up near his chest. His arms had nowhere natural to rest, because the counter only reached his hip when he was sitting. He looked like a giant trying to fit into a child's play set. Miss Agnes watched him from behind the counter and laughed, a real laugh. Light, not the polite kind. Same as always, she said. When you were little you used to sit in that chair with your feet not touching the floor. Now your feet don't fit the chair. Shaq looked down at his size 23 shoes. Plain black sneakers, nothing special, then looked back up. He smiled too. Small. Real. You still remember me, he said. Not a question. I remember all the kids on that street, Miss Agnes said, wiping her hands on her apron and pulling the chair across from him out to sit down. Same kind of pale green plastic, but she fit in hers just fine. But you were easier to remember than most. You were taller than my doorframe by 4th grade. Every time you ran past, I had to look up. Shaq pulled apart the bread roll. The crust was lightly crisp under his fingers. The butter smell came up stronger when the inside was open. He brought it to his mouth and took a bite. And he stopped. That taste. Butter and salt and flour, but more than that. Something in that taste was so familiar it made him close his eyes. Not because it was better than anything he had eaten in 40 years. He had eaten at the finest restaurants in the world. Things that cost more than he could say without laughing. Not familiar in that way. Familiar because it took him back to a place he had thought he could no longer reach. The smell of his mother's kitchen on a winter morning. When there was bread. When the refrigerator was not empty. When he got to eat before school instead of waiting for the free lunch in the cafeteria. Not every morning had bread. He knew that. But he was small, and when there was bread, he just ate it. He never asked where it came from. Now he opened his eyes and looked at Ms. Agnes. Ma'am, he started. I know what you want to ask, she said. Her voice was calm. No defensiveness. No flinching. Like a person who had been expecting this question for a long time and had already decided how she would answer it. Go ahead. Shaq set the piece of bread down on the counter. He looked straight at her. Growing up, he said slowly, my mother used to have bread in the mornings. I never understood why. She never explained. When I asked, she just said a good neighbor. That was all she said. He paused. That was you, wasn't it? Miss Agnes did not answer right away. She looked out, through the window. The street lamps had just come on outside, because the sky was going dark, pale yellow light falling down on the wet sidewalk. Your mother, she said, after a moment, was the strongest woman on that street. She never complained, never asked for help, never let anyone see when things were hard. She paused, looking down at her own hands on the counter, rough hands, knuckles grown thick, over years of working dough. The winter you were in 3rd grade. Do you remember it? The one where the building's pipes burst, and they took 3 weeks to fix. Your mother was still up at 4 in the morning getting you ready for school. Your shirts were always pressed. Your books were always there. But I knew. I lived 2 doors down, and Newark is not big enough to hide those things. I knew how empty your refrigerator was. Shaq said nothing. He listened. I didn't do anything big, Miss Agnes went on. There was nothing in her voice looking for credit. Nothing in her voice looking for anything at all. I just baked a little extra every morning. More than I needed. Then I slipped it into Lucille's bag when she walked past my shop on her way to the bus stop for work. I didn't say anything. She didn't say anything either. She paused for a moment. Some things keep their dignity only if nobody says them out loud. Shaq looked down at his own hands. The hands that had signed $100 million contracts, held 4 championship rings, shaken hands with presidents. Hands so large that the bread roll on the counter looked like a snack for a toddler when he picked it up. How long, he asked. Miss Agnes did not answer immediately. She looked up at the ceiling for just a second, the ceiling fan going through its familiar rattling turn. From the winter of your 3rd grade year, she said. Until your family moved away to follow your stepfather to Texas. 3 years. 3 years. He turned that over in his mind. 3 years of Newark winter mornings. 3 years of an empty refrigerator and pressed shirts, and a woman 2 doors down quietly baking extra every single day. Never once asking to be thanked. Never once letting it slip. Never once letting the neighbor kid know that someone was looking out for him. My mother, he started. His voice shifted slightly. My mother passed in 2016. Miss Agnes nodded slowly. I know. I read it in the paper. Did you come? She looked at him. No. No regret in her voice, just the straightforwardness of someone who had settled this question long ago and had lived with that answer. Lucille's funeral was for the people who mattered to her in that part of her life. I was an old neighbor from an old street. I didn't belong there. You were more than an old neighbor, Shaq said. Miss Agnes looked at him. For the first time, that afternoon, something shifted in her eyes, just a small flicker, quick, like a candle in a draft, and then it was steady again. You want more bread? She asked. No, he said. I want to keep talking. They sat there for another hour. Ms. Agnes made tea, the cheap bag kind she kept in an old tin near the stove, and they sat across the low counter from each other, 2 pale green plastic chairs, thin yellow light overhead, the Newark night coming down outside. Shaq asked about the bakery, not to investigate, because he wanted to hear. He had learned early that people tell you more when they feel like you are actually listening. Miss Agnes had opened this shop 22 years ago, after her husband, a welder named Raymond, died of a stroke at 49. No warning, no time to prepare. He went to work one morning and did not come back. She had no large savings, only her mother's bread recipe. Her mother had sold bread at the Newark open market for 30 years and a $47,000 bank loan that took her 7 years to pay back, dollar by dollar. The shop never got big, but it was enough to raise her son on her own, enough to pay rent on time every month, enough to have a small amount left at the end of each year that she could put in a savings account. Marcus used to come help after school, she said. When he was young, it was washing dishes, sweeping up. When he got older, he did deliveries for a few coffee shops in the area. He was not a bread person. He was good with electricity, good with machines, but he always showed up. Shaq noticed the way she talked about her son. Present tense mixing in with past, used to come, always showed up, the way a person talks when they have not fully gotten used to the past tense yet. How is Marcus now? He asked, though he had already started to understand. Ms. Agnes set her teacup down, gently, carefully, the way a person handles something fragile. Last year, she said, just those 2 words. But the way she said them, flat in a way that hurt to hear, said everything. Work accident, she continued after a moment. March. High voltage line at a construction site in East Orange. The emergency surgery lasted 11 hours. Newark Beth Israel Hospital. She looked out the window. I sat in the hallway on the 3rd floor all night. Alone. There was no one else I could call. Shaq said nothing. He just sat there and let her finish. Marcus didn't make it. She said it in the same flat voice, the voice of a person who had said this sentence many times now. To doctors, to insurance people, to customers asking why the shop was closing. And every time she said it, it wore down a little more, until the voice had no more trembling left in it. Not because it stopped hurting, but because there was no more room to hold the pain. The hospital bills and the funeral costs came to $31,200. Workers' compensation covered part of it. Not enough, it is never enough. The rest she paid out of the savings account. The one she had been putting money into every single month for 22 years. $50 here, $100 there, $200 in a good month. 22 years of 4 a.m. mornings, of turning the oven on in the dark, of washing the last dishes after the last customer left. Gone in 1 month. Then the rent came due. Then the next month. Then the next. The debt built up the way water seeps through a wall, slowly, quietly, but it does not stop. As of today, $23,400. The landlord was Meridian Property Group, headquartered in Manhattan. The official notice had been sent. Pay in full, within 30 days, or the shop would be seized and everything inside it taken. Did you try to negotiate with them? Shaq asked. Yes. Ms. Agnes picked up her teacup, but did not drink. They were very polite. Their people said they understood my situation. Then they said their process is their process. They have rules. They have shareholders. They cannot set a precedent. A pause. I understand. They are not wrong. A process is a process. Shaq nodded slowly. He knew that kind of answer. He had heard it many times, in different rooms, at different tables, from different people in different suits. Polite. Cold. Precise. Not negotiable. How many days left? He asked. Miss Agnes looked up at the calendar on the wall. A flour company calendar. A picture of bread on every month. 27 days. Shaq looked around the shop one more time. Slow. Corner to corner. The box is half-packed. The display case nearly empty. The ceiling fan still rattling. The first wooden table near the door had a pale brown coffee stain that never fully came out, the kind of stain that only happens when a place has had people sitting in it long enough, often enough. Then he looked at Miss Agnes. She was not looking back at him with pleading eyes. Nothing like that. She looked at him with the eyes of a person who had added up all the numbers, tried all the doors, and decided that this was the result. Not a good result, but the result of what had happened. And she had accepted it, not because it did not hurt, but because acceptance was the only thing she still had control over. He had seen that look before, on his mother's face, many times. During the Newark years, when the money ran out, before the month did, when he asked why there was nothing for dinner, and she said she was cooking. His mother never asked for help, never complained, just stood up straight and kept going. He stood up. The plastic chair creaked as the weight left it. Thank you for the tea and the bread, he said. Miss Agnes nodded. Come back any time. He walked out. The bell rang above the door. The night air outside was colder than when he had gone in. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking ahead. A bus went past, its yellow headlights sweeping across his face, then gone. He did not call a car. He walked back to the hotel. The hotel Shaq was staying at was a mid-range place in downtown Newark, the kind, with green carpet in the hallways, that was worn thin along the walking paths, an ice machine at the end of the hall that groaned all night, and a front desk clerk on the overnight shift who watched videos on his phone when no guests were around. He had requested the room at the end of the hall because the ceiling there was 4 inches higher than the standard rooms, a small detail his assistant always checked before booking anything in Newark. He sat on the edge of the bed creaked under him, and did nothing for a few minutes. Outside the window, the street lights of Newark blurred in the drizzle that had started to fall. Then he opened the nightstand drawer. He always did that in hotel rooms, a habit from following his stepfather through military bases, as a kid, sleeping in unfamiliar rooms, always checking around before he slept. Usually the drawer just had the hotel Bible, but this time he was not looking for the Bible. He took out what he had placed there the night before going to sleep, the piece of paper he had brought with him from Orlando, the one he had taken from the small blue tin box, his mother's keepsake box. He unfolded it. Brown paper, old. The fold lines were so soft from being folded and unfolded over the years that the paper did not resist at all when he opened it. When he smoothed it flat on the bedspread, a faint old smell came up, the smell of something that had been folded away for a very long time inside a box that was rarely opened. No writing inside, no note, no name, just a grease stain, pale, spread in an uneven shape, gone yellowish with age. Bread wrapping paper. He sat and looked at that piece of paper on the hotel bedspread. The overhead light shone down on it. Outside, the Newark drizzle tapped softly against the window. His mother had kept a piece of bread wrapping paper in her keepsake box, right next to her wedding photo, right next to his school certificates, right next to the first letter he had sent home from LSU. She had kept it the way you keep something important. No note with it. No explanation. Just kept it. And he had never understood why, until today. Now he understood. This was the paper Miss Agnes had used to wrap the bread. His mother had kept it, not the bread, but the paper it came in. Because the bread was eaten that same morning. But the paper was proof that someone had thought of them. On a dark Newark winter morning, someone had woken up early and baked extra and slipped it into the bag of a woman who was trying to stay standing, without letting her son see how tired she was. His mother had carried this paper through more than a dozen moves over 30 years. Through Texas, through Louisiana, through Orlando. She had never told him who had done it. Shaq folded the paper back, carefully, along the same old lines. Set it down. Then he picked up his phone and called his assistant. The next morning, the file came in at 6:47 a.m. Shaq read it on his phone while standing at the window drinking coffee, watching Newark wake up, gray, cold, traffic starting to move. Meridian Property Group, founded 2008. Headquarters in Manhattan. Currently owns 34 commercial and residential buildings in Newark and the surrounding area. Last year's revenue, $14.7 million. Not a huge company, but big enough that $23,400 was not a number they lost sleep over. That was the core problem. For an organization that size, $23,400 is not a meaningful number. That is exactly why Ms. Agnes could not negotiate. Not because they were cruel, but because the number was too small to give them any reason to adjust their process for one exception. Make an exception for one person, and everyone comes asking for exceptions. That is how organizations work. The logic is correct, but it grinds up people like Ms. Agnes. Shaq scrolled down the file, reading slowly. Then he stopped on one item in Meridian's property list. The block at 45 to 51 100th Street, Newark. Currently listed for sale as a package investment deal for commercial ground floor spaces and 2 upper floor apartments. Asking price, $2.8 million. Listed for 6 months. No buyer yet. Number 47 100th Street, Ms. Agnes's bakery, was part of that package. Shaq put his phone down. He stood looking out the window. The bus at the stop across the street. 2 people getting on, 1 getting off. The bus pulling away. He picked his phone back up. Hey, he said when his assistant answered. I want to buy the block at 45 to 5100 from Meridian Property Group. The whole package. A short pause. The whole package, sir? $2.8 million. The whole package. Use the Newark investment account. Keep my name off it. Handle it the same way we do every other Newark real estate deal. As fast as you can. Understood. I'll contact Meridian today. Shaq ended the call, finished his coffee, looked out at Newark a little longer. He did not feel like he was doing something big. He was just paying something that had been overdue for a very long time. Nothing more than that. The negotiation took 3 days. Not because Meridian did not want to sell. The block had been listed for 6 months. With no interest, they had been wanting to sell it for a while. But when Shaq's assistant reached out with an opening offer of $2.65 million, slightly under asking, but clearly serious, Meridian got cautious. An anonymous buyer with obvious financial strength, wanting to move fast, not asking to view the property in person, not asking many questions. That naturally raised questions on their end. Shaq's legal team handled everything. He did not appear in any meeting directly. His name was not in any paperwork at the negotiation stage. Only the name of the investment company he had been using for Newark real estate deals for years. A long, dry name that meant nothing to anyone who read it. That was the cover he needed. Because if the name Shaquille O'Neal showed up anywhere, the story would be out within 24 hours. The press would come. The cameras would come. And when the cameras showed up outside Ms. Agnes's bakery, she would know. She would figure out what had happened. And she would refuse. He knew she would refuse. 1 hour sitting with her was enough to know that. This was a woman who had spent 40 years never accepting a favor from anyone, not because she did not need help, but because she had decided early on that her dignity was not available to be an object of someone else's pity. She gave without needing anything back, but she also did not accept things that would make her feel like someone who had been rescued. If he walked into her shop tomorrow with a check, she would slide it back across the counter and thank him very politely. He needed a different way. A way she could not refuse, because she would never see the check. On the 4th day, the deal was signed. $2.68 million to be paid within 15 business days. In the supplemental terms, the standard language used in any real estate sale involving active tenants, Shaq's lawyers had included a standard clause. All current lease agreements would be carried over in full by the new owner, and any outstanding rent arrears prior to the date of closing would be treated as settled within the purchase price adjustment. On paper, it was standard commercial language. Meridian accepted it because it simplified the handover process, and they were ready to close the deal. In reality, it was the way to wipe out $23,400 without anyone seeing it get wiped out. No check, no envelope, no moment of hand-to-hand giving in front of a camera. Nothing for Ms. Agnes to look at and feel like she was on the receiving end of charity. Just one clause in a purchase agreement she would never read. On the afternoon of the 5th day, Shaq walked back down 100th Street. The rain had stopped. The wind was still cold, but there was sun, the thin kind Newark gets in November, not warm enough to feel good, but enough to remind you the sky is still up there above the low rooftops. He pushed the door open. The bell rang. Ms. Agnes was behind the counter, not packing boxes like before. She was working dough. Both hands pushing and folding and pushing again, white flour up to her elbows. A small gospel record was playing from an old Bluetooth speaker on the shelf, quiet, but clear in the stillness of the shop. She looked up. "You came back." "I came back," Shaq said. He sat down in the pale green plastic chair. Carefully, same as before. "MS." Agnes wiped her hands on her apron, left the dough on the counter, and went to rinse her hands at the small sink by the wall. "I made apple bread this morning," she said. "You want a piece?" "Yes," he said. She went into the back. He heard the sound of a knife cutting. A ceramic plate lifted and set down. While she was back there, the rear door of the shop opened, and a young woman came in, mid-20s, hair in braids, a thick navy blue jacket, a stack of papers in her hand. She saw Shaq and stopped mid-step, not because she recognized him, because he was large enough to take up most of the space between the counter and the wall, and she had not expected anyone to be sitting there. "Oh," she said. "Hello," Shaq said. Ms. Agnes came out, from the back, carrying 2 plates of apple bread. "Marcus's daughter, Denise. She stops by to help me out." Denise looked from Shaq to her aunt. "Auntie, the lawyer just called me." Ms. Agnes set the 2 plates down on the counter. "What about?" Denise looked down at the papers in her hand. Her voice was uncertain, like she was reading something she had not fully processed yet. "They said the back rent on the shop was cleared in the ownership transfer. Balance is 0, and our lease carries over to the new owner." She looked up. "They said the shop is not being taken." Silence. The ceiling fan rattled through its turn. Ms. Agnes stood still behind the counter. She looked at the papers in Denise's hand. Then she looked up, straight across the counter, straight at Shaq. He said nothing. He picked up his plate of apple bread, took a bite, and looked out the window like he was checking the weather. "Shaq." Ms. Agnes's voice. He turned and looked at her. Her eyes were red. Not crying. Not yet. But close. Very close. The line between holding it and letting it go was no thicker than a thread. "You did not have to do that," she said. "You're right," Shaq said. "I didn't have to. But I wanted to. You don't owe me anything." "You fed me for 3 years," he said, not sharp, just clear, the way a person states a simple fact. "You never told anyone. You never asked for anything back. You didn't even bring it up when I was sitting right here asking." He set his plate down. "Do you know what that means to me?" Ms. Agnes did not answer. "My mother," he continued, his voice slower now, "kept a piece of bread wrapping paper in her keepsake box. Right next to her wedding photo. Right next to my school certificates. Right next to the first letter I sent home from college." He looked down at the counter for a moment. "She didn't keep the bread was eaten. She kept the paper. The wrapping paper." Denise stood in the back doorway, papers still in her hand, not moving, not breathing loudly. "I only understood that 3 days ago," Shaq said. "After 40 years. Ms. Agnes raised her hand to cover her mouth. This time the tears came. She did not try to hold them back anymore. Not loud crying, no sobbing. Just tears running down her face in silence. The way something does when it has been held in too long, and now it simply has to come out. Shaq did not stand up to hug her, did not pat her shoulder, did not say the kinds of words that sound good but mean nothing. He just sat there, large and quiet and solid, like a man who understood that sometimes what a person needs is not someone to rescue them or comfort them, but someone to stay long enough to say, "I see what you did. I remember it." It did not disappear. The ceiling fan rattled. The gospel music kept playing softly from the speaker on the shelf. After a moment, Miss Agnes wiped her eyes, with the corner of her apron, took a slow breath. Then she looked at Shaq, with eyes that were no longer trying to hold anything back. "You were always stubborn," she said. Her voice was still a little unsteady, but she was smiling. "I learned it from Newark people," he said. Denise let out a small laugh. From the back doorway, she had tried to hold it in, but could not. "Ms." Agnes looked at her niece and smiled too. Not a big laugh, but real. Something in that small shop, under the pale yellow light, with the rattling fan and the faint gospel music, got lighter. They stayed for another hour. Miss Agnes made tea. Denise pulled a chair up to the same side of the counter and sat down, quiet at first, just listening, but gradually she started to talk. About the shop, about the regulars, about old Mr. Parker who came in every Tuesday morning and bought exactly one small roll, always paying with exact change he had prepared the night before. About Ms. Marlene from down the street, who ordered a birthday cake for her son every year even, though she knew this was not a cake shop, and Ms. Agnes always said yes, because she could not say no. "That display case rattles every time you open it," Denise said. "Auntie Agnes won't get it fixed." "Because it's better than a bell," Miss Agnes said. "I know when a customer comes in, without having to look up." Shaq looked at the display case, at the old weld joint in the corner of the frame, at the small scratch on the glass near the lower right, the kind of scratch that only happens after years of someone's hand wiping across it every single day. He thought about his mother, not Lucille in her later years. Lucille in the nice house in Orlando he had bought for her, with the garden and the window looking out over the water. But Lucille in Newark. Lucille up at 4 in the morning. Lucille in her thin coat walking past the bakery on the way to the bus stop. Lucille who never let him see she was tired. Not because she was not tired, but because she had decided that what mattered most was him waking up every morning knowing things were okay. Lucille had carried a piece of bread wrapping paper through 30 years and never once explained why. Now he understood why. Not because the paper had value, but because the paper was evidence of something his mother had known and never had the chance to say to him out loud. That even in the darkest years in Newark, when the refrigerator was empty and the money ran out, before the month did, someone had seen them. Not seen their poverty, seen them. Seen Lucille standing up straight every morning and recognized that as something worth respecting. Miss Agnes had not given bread out of pity. She had given it out of respect. And those two things are not the same at all. When Shaq stood up to leave, Ms. Agnes stepped behind the counter and pulled out a sheet of brown paper. The same kind she had used for 22 years to wrap bread for customers taking it home. Thick brown paper, no printing on it, kept in a large roll on the kitchen shelf. She set a bread roll on the paper, not the apple bread, but the small plain white round, the simplest thing in the shop. Then she wrapped it, folding the corners the careful way, exactly the way she had done it 40 years ago every morning when she wrapped bread for Lucille. She slid the package across the counter toward him. Shaq looked down. Brown paper, clean folds, the bread inside still warm. He could feel the warmth through the paper when he put his hand on it. He picked it up. It was so light it almost had no weight in his large hand. "Thank you," he said. Miss Agnes nodded. She did not say anything more. He walked out. The bell rang above the door. Outside, the Newark wind was cold the same as always. He stood on the sidewalk for a second, the wrapped bread in his hand. Then he looked back, through the glass one last time. Miss Agnes had gone back behind the counter. She was working the dough again, both hands pushing and folding and pushing back. The gospel music still playing softly, the ceiling fan still rattling. Nothing had changed, and everything had changed. He turned and walked back toward the hotel. No car, no hurry. Feet moving along the Newark sidewalk as the afternoon faded, past the nail salon that used to be a corner store, past the concrete playground with no net on the rim, past apartment 14 with the pale yellow curtains in the second-floor window. He opened the brown paper, took out the bread, and ate it walking. In the middle of a Newark street, cold wind, the smell of wet pavement, the street lights blinking on in the early dark. Just like third grade. Only one thing was different this time. This time he knew who to thank. The bakery at 47 Hunterdon Street still opens every morning. Ms. Agnes still gets up at 4 o'clock, still turns on the oven, still works the dough, with the same two hands, that have worked dough for 22 years. Still the green apron, with flour on the shoulder. Still the smell of butter coming through the gap at the bottom of the door, while the street is still dark. No new sign out front. No ribbon cutting. No reporters with cameras. Only one thing is different inside, that small shop. Next to the display case, in the spot where Ms. Agnes used to keep the handwritten menu, there is now a small wooden frame. Inside it is a piece of brown paper, folded and unfolded, the crease lines soft, a butter stain spread across it, gone pale with time. No caption, no name, just the paper. The regulars ask her about it sometimes. Miss Agnes just smiles and says, "An old memory." She never says anything more than that. She never has.